Hello there and welcome. This is part 6 of the temple build, and we're going to build a garden around the temple. I have brought out all sorts of basing materials. I even got some things here I found. I got them for free. It's usually used for railroading, and I think this grass could be a very good base for some of the parts of the garden. I don't know about this, but let's see how it goes. There's a lot of things to build. I also 3D printed some trees. I'm still waiting on some packages with some more materials I'm going to need for this build. But for now, let's get started. I will need to fill in all these blank spaces between the buildings, and it will still need to fit on my table. I did some measurements and I brought out my Proxon to cut out some pieces of Army Painter foam. I ended up with 7 pieces of foam. I will have 3 in the back of the temple around the observatory, and 2 in the middle and 2 in front of the temple along the prayer hall. Now I just need to lay out a plan for all the paths so they will fit all the external doors and the cobblestones in front of the temple. For the cobblestones, I will use one of my rollers. The problem here is that this Army Painter foam doesn't take well on these rollers. I will have to put enormous amount of pressure on it. But I think it turned out okay. It could be better, and in the future I will need to find another way to make these kind of cobblestones. I will also need some city tiles in this future, and I don't know yet how to fix this problem. I have some ideas, but I think this is okay for now. To make some texture in the pathways, I ended up using this snow flocking from the Army Painter. I want the pathways to have a very fine gravel look, and I think if I was using some sand, it would be a bit too rough. So the choice was on this snow flocking. I applied some Mod Podge on all the paths with a brush, and then I sprinkle on all the snow flocking. I got this jar of cheap decorative stones, and the size was perfect to mark up all the paths along the edge. This was a very time-consuming process, and I spent almost 2 evenings in total to put in all the stones along the paths. But I think this was all worth it, and the layout of the garden started to take shape. Before we give it some paint, I will need to make one final little cutout. This is a 1 inch by 1 inch little square. And this is to prepare something I will need to do in the final build of the temple. But you will have to wait until episode 7 of this temple build to know what this is all about. It's time to prime everything. I will use this Army Painter Ruins and Cliff. This is a foam safe spray, and it has a very good coverage, and it is very easy to work with. I was almost running out of paint, so I think I will add on some of this wilderness and woodland, just to make sure everything is covered up okay. This won't almost be visible at all, so it doesn't matter what color it is. This is the next day, and all the primer has dried up. But I noticed something. I think I put the primer on too soon, and the glue wasn't totally dry, so it cracked up. This is not a big deal since I'm going to paint it anyway, but this is worth to take note of in future projects. For the rocks, I will use uniform gray. I will apply it as a heavy dry brush, and I will dry brush all the paths with the same color. To give all the rocks and paths some highlights, I will use this brigade gray and dry brush it on as well. Along the outside edge of the rocks, I will use this bridgeline brown. This is to give it a more earth-like tone before I will apply all the grass. I will glue on all these grass mats, but I need to cut them along the edge of the rocks. And this turned out to be harder work than I actually thought. I made a rough cutout of the grass just to make sure that it would cover everything. I applied some Mod Podge and then I attached the grass. I had cut the grass mat a bit oversized so it would overlap the rocks. And with my X-Acto knife, I needed to trim the edge along the rocks so the grass would fit between the rocks and under the rocks. And this just took forever. Maybe it would have been easier to put on all the rocks after I have put down the grass. But then I would think I've had some other problems, because then I needed to paint the rocks and accidentally maybe paint the grass, and I didn't want that to happen either. Maybe this was the easy way after all, but I spent almost 3 nights applying all this grass, but I think the result turned out pretty good. But now I need to make some scatter terrain. I have these 3D printed trees, I have some statues and a fountain, and then my package arrived right on time. Let's see what's inside the box. I ordered some different kinds of colored flocking, some flower tufts, and some trees. I don't know yet if I'm going to use these trees, they're kind of big, but maybe in another video I will make some other trees I can use for a forest setup. But before we get back to that, I will need to prime the statues, the fountain and the trees. I will paint them black, give them a zenithal highlight with gray, and dry brush them with some white. For the water of the bottom of the fountain, I will use this Terrain Navy. It is actually pretty easy to paint statues. I use some dark tone after I have primed and dry brushed everything with white, and then you get the perfect effect and look of a statue. For the trees, I will use this dark wood speed paint and some speed paint medium to lighten up the color. I noticed in the bottom of the fountain there was actually some coins, so I will paint them with some bright gold. I think I can use this in my adventure for a fun gimmick that it could be some kind of a healing fountain. So for each gold coin you put in the fountain, you will gain 1 HP. However, for each gold coin you steal in the fountain, you will lose 1 HP. I think the bottom of the fountain looked a bit too clean, so I will put some dry leaves in the bottom, just a couple to give it some effect. To make some water running out of the barrel of the statue, I use this Vita wrap. I will just twist a tiny piece of it and superglue it into the barrel and the bottom of the fountain. To give the full water effect, I will use this Vallejo diorama water effects. I'll just pour in some drops and let it flow to the edges. This is a very easy way to make some very cool water effects. It will take up 3 to 4 hours to fully cure up, but I think it's still worth it when you are working with small areas. To decorate the trees, I will spray them with some thinned down Mod Podge and put on some colored moss. After that, I will spray it again and use some of the new pink flocking I just got delivered. Now I just need to set these to dry. Now I will need to make some raised beds. This is for the herb farm. I will cut a piece of foam in 2 by 1 inch. I will need 6 of those, and then I will use some coffee stir sticks to make some wooden boxes. I used a side cutter to cut up all the pieces that I needed, and then I could start gluing everything in. I used tacky glue and super glue for this. I made the vertical planks a bit longer than I needed. This is to make a pointed tip so I can just press it down on the foam. I also needed to trim down the corners, and with my side cutter I could also make the pointy tip. The glue on the trees made a very shiny surface on the wood, and I didn't like that. I also needed to make it a bit green in the bottom, so I used some camel cloak speed paint for that. I also needed something in the top. and I used a very thin down darkwood to cover up the shiny surface. The water effect for the fountain had dried up overnight, but I also needed some riffles for the water effect of the falling water, and I used this AK water effect for this. It is very easy, you can just paint it on and it will make a tiny wave on the surface. When working with this water effect it is white, but when it's drying up it will just be totally clear. To make some white foam I used some white acrylic paint. The speed paint on the trees is now dry and I really like how these turned out. All the glue on the raised beds is also dry, so I can paint it with some darkwood speed paint. I will give it some highlights with some bootstrap brown acrylic and apply it with a dry brush. And now they're ready for some plants and herbs. But before that we need to make some bases for other flower beds and some bases for the trees, because I don't want to attach anything directly to the foam. I want to be able to move everything around as I need for each scenario. I cut out some various sizes of MDF. This is a 3mm MDF. And then I beveled the edges on my disc sander. These two are for some small flower beds, and the two larger up here is for the pink trees. And these two are for the statues. The last three will be various sized flower beds. The flower beds and the bases for the statues will have some small stones around them. This is to cover up the edge and make them blend more in with the grass that they are going to sit on. I will use some super glue to put the trees on the bases, and then I'm going to use this dark earth texture paint from AK. The flower beds are pretty simple. I will use these new tufts I bought and make some nice flower beds. And I don't even use glue, I just use this AK dark earth texture paint to put them on. And then it's just making some nice patterns and mixing up some colored flowers. I've never done this kind of flower beds before, so this was brand new to me and this is a new technique I've never used before. So I think this is a very easy way to do it, and I will probably make more of these in the future. And the future is near, but I just need to paint these other bases before that. The rocks need to be painted a lighter gray, but first I will need to prime them with some matte black. The black paint dries up pretty fast on the MDF, and while I was waiting for the rocks to dry, I might as well put in the two statues. I just put a drop of super glue on the base and some activator in the bottom of the statue. And then it's just stuck right away. This is just working instantly. And then I just needed to wait a couple of more minutes and then I could paint the rocks with this deep gray. And finish up the rocks with this company gray with a dry brush. I think the two larger flower beds needed some more decorations. So I went to my driveway and picked up some crushed granite. I found some suitable shapes and glued them in with some super glue. Some AK dark earth texture paint and some flower tufts all around the sculptures and the statues. And the last thing I need to do is the raised beds. These are going to be more herb-like, so it's something that you can harvest and use for potions and other magical stuff. I had these army painter tufts and I think they look very spicy. I also had some more green army painter tufts and I used them for this bed. I also had some other tufts. This is some tall shrubbery from Green Stuff World. I had two different kinds of these laying around and I have rarely used them, so I think these will be good at giving the raised beds a more elevated look. I used a pointed tweezer to poke some holes and this made it a lot easier to put in the shrubbery. and I used the same procedure with the darker version of the shrubbery. And in the final two of the raised beds, I will use those more alien-like tufts I recently got delivered.
And the garden is done. I'm very excited about this. This was a great challenge for me because I've never done anything like this before. It is pretty easy to make something look rough and worn when you're making terrain, but making something look more precise and like someone that had taken care of it, that's actually pretty difficult. And working with bright colors and vibrancy is also something that is new to me. And I really love how these herb gardens looked. But let's have a closer look at how the temple looks with a garden all around it. Thank you so much for watching this to the end. I really appreciate you all being here. And as usual, if you already haven't and you think I earned it, please subscribe. Leave a comment below if you have something you want to say to me. I will try to answer as fast as possible. And we are almost done building the temple. I only have one video left, and it's going to be very, very exciting for me to build it. If you want to find out what it is, tune back in and I will be there with some interesting stuff for the temple. Goodbye for now.